Welcome everyone to a lecture on Heidegger on the true face of technology and the will to power. I'm going to be reading from my book on Heidegger from the third part on technology. The book is called Heidegger on Death and Being, published by Springer in 2021. Heidegger says in his last lecture course, Was heißt denken? What does thinking mean and what does it call for? What does it demand? This is how this should be translated, I think. He said the true face of technology will soon show itself in an eternal repetition or an endless repetition of itself or circling around itself. The imminent danger of this will to make and to produce and to control is the closing down of the other dimensions of being and thus of our essential history. The threat is that being becomes increasingly one-dimensional, that there is only the frame of techniques where no sense of wonder or awe seem possible, no dwelling, lingering, no gaze, but only end-driven production for the sake of production. Heidegger sees the will to power at work in this what he calls machination. Quote from Heidegger, machination is the unconditional completion of being as the will to power. Heidegger critically extends Nietzsche's notion of the will to power when he, in the book Das Ereignis, begins to speak of the will to will, der Wille zum Willen. Like the will to power, this will is a will to domination, to ever more power over the earth, its resources and inhabitants. Yet as Heidegger writes in his response to Ernst Jünger, and with reference to Nietzsche, the will to will is the, quote, most uncanny guest, because as the unconditional will to will, it wills homelessness as such. For Heidegger, the will to will is a direct consequence of the closure of metaphysics that occurs with Hegel and Nietzsche. Hegel establishes the absolute certainty and knowledge about the beingness of beings. Nietzsche determines being as the will to power. Thus, beings in their being are absolutely secured as will to power and are accessible as such. There is here a nihilism of the pure will to power that wills itself unconditionally. Heidegger thus sees yet another shift. The will to power actually wills itself, and necessarily so. Nietzsche is not the first and only to speak of the will. The will is an essential occurrence steering the course of modernity. The will to will is insatiable, like Spinoza's conatus and Schopenhauer's will. Schelling notoriously determines Ursein, Urbeing, or primordial being as will in his treatise on human freedom. Fichte rationalizes the acts of the will in terms of the will itself, of which we can only say, quote from Fichte, it is as it is because it is so. Of course, one has to make important distinctions between all these thinkers and their respective notions of the will. In Fichte, we speak of human freedom much more than we do in Schelling. Still, they do seem to be responding to a similar phenomenon. But what does such a will want? This will wants itself, as Fichte seems to imply. This will is its self-sufficient foundation. Hence, the will, in fact, De Gennaro writes, wills itself so that the ultimate sense of the will to power is the will to will. Also Fichte. Heidegger brings the will that presents itself in modern metaphysics to its logical conclusion, to its necessary conclusion. The will wills itself, and it wills itself because it wills itself, because it is so. You can see the causa sui, the self-causing cause, enacting itself here. The will wills itself and wills itself because it wills itself. So this circularity, which we also find in cybernetics, finds expression in the notion will to will. In this epoch, metaphysics responds to the abysmal occurring of being, with the will as the foundation of all beings. A self-rotating will, willing itself, that wills itself simply because it wills itself, and as such, it sets itself into effect in technology. So the will to will means the rule of being's reification as the beingness of beings, as the representation of the subject, in as what the subject can represent, and as such then control. In the essay The Thing, Heidegger illustrates this process by the example of a now prevalent way of understanding beings as, quote, states of aggregation of matter. Wine is, according to the scientific world representation, not a specific wine with a unique being that cannot be perfectly reproduced over and over again. Wine is not a gift from the gods, something that mortals cherish by sacrificing the wine to the gods and by honoring the earth, which gave the wine. The earth that also is the realm where a community's ancestors are buried. Instead, wine is a liquid, first level of abstraction, and liquid is a state of aggregation, second level of abstraction. The wine entirely disappears behind those abstractions. But those abstractions are precisely what allows industrial agriculture to produce the seemingly ever same wine. This, in turn, means that the rotation of the will is effectively the neutralization of time and history insofar as technology strives to make beings available by setting into actuality their ever same beingness. At the same time, of course, as this weird endless repetition has already set in, we can see many different products having to be announced as new or optimized formula, etc. This can be pharmaceuticals or uh, laundry detergent. It doesn't make a difference, right? This can be something you put in your body or you use to clean your dishes. It's new, optimized formula, because it's not, because it's a circle that is circling around itself. There's here a forgetting of being. As this defies the truth of being, the withdrawal and denial that are inherent to all appearance, that any access to beings takes place only according to ecstatic time, any genuine access. So, in a letter to Father Richardson, Heidegger points out that time is to be understood as the clearing of self-concealment. Thus, in this uncanny historical constellation, there seems to be an eradication of time at work, if time is that which allows for being's self-concealment. The denial of concealment prevalent in the will to will is manifest in technology. Quote, the universally unmistakable consistency of the progression testifies that the will to will has become the actuality of the actual. Hence, Heidegger sees something as work in technology that, with reference to Nietzsche, he understands as, quote, a steadily rotating repetition of the same. This is in what is called thinking, was heißt denken. Their metaphysical essence, their whatness, is the will to will. That is to say, what beings are in their beingness is owed to the representation of the willing subject. Their existence, their thatness, is the eternal repetition. That is to say, that beings are means that they can be perfectly replaced. This shows how beings can be made available at will at all times, and that includes the human being, by means of a represented beingness. Technology makes becoming operational in the sense that technology forces all beings to recur, to become, as the ever same beingness in a controlled fashion. And the ultimate aim, of course, is to produce the human being as such. It circulates around itself without purpose. That means that technology at its heart is an endless will to will in the realm of insatiable nihilism. And here also, in this last lecture course, Heidegger reads Nietzsche's Zarathustra as epitomizing the problem of the hermeneutics of vulgar, linear time. Heidegger understands Nietzsche's eternal recurrence of the same as a means of the will to power to remain in power. According to the vulgar understanding of time, which is prevalent in all of philosophy, time is made up of homogeneous now states that flow in a linear fashion from the future to the present and into the past. This continuous flow of homogeneous now states, that the current now state, means that the current now state is always already under threat of becoming obsolete. What is currently being represented is already losing its presence and hence becomes obsolete, turns into something absent. But the will wants to hold tight to the current now, but fails. Therefore, the will to power develops a resentment against time and it was, as Nietzsche's Zarathustra says. The it was offends both representation and the will. Representation needs presence and availability. Only what is present can be represented, and only what can be represented is real, is actual. Actual also has this ring to it in English especially, that it's something current, it's something present. What ceases to be is not because only that which is represented is. This explains the prevalence and might of the picture in modernity. The will turns against the ephemeral nature of linear time because what the will needs is presence. Heidegger quotes from Zarathustra. This is Nietzsche. This alone is revenge itself. The will's revulsion against time and its it was. As beings cease to be, the will seeks revenge, and its revenge drives the will to want the ever same and controllable outcome at all times, which the will needs for total control over beings. As we shall see, this is what Bestand, a standing resource, delivers. Right? This is what, if you understand beings only now as a standing reserve or a standing resource, standing ready to be exploited, that's what it does, because that is already crowding out any kind of finite temporality. The German word Heidegger uses for seeking revenge is nachstellen. Nachstellen can mean to position oneself behind someone else with the intent to chase after or even harm them. In Gestell, beings are without guard, precisely since they are not allowed their own time and place, but must stand ready at any time and anywhere. But nachstellen also means to imitate and to simulate. That is to say, the will to will operates by chasing after and imitating, simulating beings. Thus, the will produces the ever same outcome it desires by producing a simulacrum. I'm now going to read a long quote from Heidegger to end my lecture, which is also from What is Called Thinking, because it summarizes how the will to will in techniques and machination operates to destroy time. Since long ago, that which is present has been regarded as what is. But what representational ideas can we form of what is, of what in a way is no longer, and yet still is? What ideas can we form of that which was? At this it was, idea and its willing take offense. Faced with what was, willing no longer has anything to say. Faced with every it was, willing no longer has anything to propose. This it was resists the willing of that will. The it was becomes a stumbling block for all willing. It is the block which the will can no longer budge. Then the it was becomes the sorrow and despair of all willing, which, being what it is, always wills forward, and is always foiled by the bygones that lie fixed firmly in the past. Thank you very much. And as mentioned before, if you'd like to study Heidegger more closely, more intensely with me in a course, then just follow the link in the description of this video and you get more details on my Heidegger courses. And also, as I'm a free scholar, this work is made possible by the generous donations and support from you. And there will be several different links, one to PayPal, Bitcoin, etc. if you'd like to support my work in any way. And as always, please leave a comment, share the video as well. Thank you very much indeed.